All right, so now we'll get started with the main event. I'm so excited to welcome you all to the Writer Center's virtual craft chat series, where we talk with writers a little less about what they wrote and a little more about how they wrote it. My name is Emily Holland, and I'm thrilled to have Brian Turner joining us as tonight's guest in celebration of his 3 new poetry collections, The Wild Delight of Wild Things, The Goodbye World Poem, and The Dead Peasant's Handbook. Brian, thank you for being here with us tonight.
Oh, it's a joy. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And congratulations on those 3 sort of successive publications. I can't wait to talk about each of these books and how they're working together. Would you mind kicking us off with a reading of some of your poems?
Sure. And thank you all for coming out tonight to this and being here. This book, The Wild Delight of Wild Things, the title comes from a poem written by Elise Kuznets, my wife, and or I should say I'm her husband, but it's called Geologic, and it begins like this. When I don't have a body anymore, when I'm ash and fragmented bone, I think about the early people trapped between one geological era and another, unfathomable. Their dust must yearn to rise, but can't. So much pressure on their carbon, hydrogen, trace elements we've lost, forgotten. Will we all become diamonds? Will anything of us beyond an uncertain glimmer survive? Remember when we visited the animal refuge, fed parakeets in the aviary from ice cream sticks, glittering with seeds? The tickle and nudge of their beaks, a perfect engulfment, the wild delight of wild things, my love. I hope we'll have that again. So you can see that was almost an invocation for me to write this book. Many of you probably don't know, the details of my life, but Elise, this is my problem with the English language. It's imperfect, and it's missing entire sort of categories of words. Like, there needs to be another verb tense, and there need to be ways for those who are gone, who have crossed over. They're not gone, but they've crossed over into the river of stars, however you might want to put it. The hospice people say that they've crossed over. Other people say dead, or they've died. But Elise is among them now, those I love who've crossed over. And so she passed in 2016 and from cancer. And her second book was called Angel Bones. It's this one here. It was from Alice James Books. It was done posthumously. So she completed the book, but then didn't have enough time to order the book, that kind of thing. And this poem I've brought over into my own book to begin this series of meditations, these poems, Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you.
Yeah. Should I read a poem from the next book, or?
Sure. Yeah, please do.
Because it's a matter of caffeine. You were talking about peppermint tea with caffeine. Like I think this just was a lot of caffeine. You know what I mean? And a lot of emotional freight, and more. But this is from the Goodbye World poem, and thank you, Anne, for saying that about Angel Bones. I really, that makes my heart sing. This is called 141. She often sculpted the air with her hands as she spoke, gesturing the world into being. And I'm reminded of this as I restart the video so that I might be with her again. The daylight flooded in through the window behind her, a day I can't place on a calendar, though it's summer 2016. And in a moment, she's going to say, "Oh, how fun," as she opens a package filled with tiny prayer bowls, showing me how she'll hide away messages in each before shipping them to loved ones around the globe. In a few seconds, she'll blow a kiss to me and we'll say, "I love you," before she follows with, "Later, maybe we can," and I'll never hear the completion of that thought. I'm left with this 1 minute, 41-second video, this slipping into the past, the 2020s, a blurring of images and voices that fade as soon as she describes the biplanar wings of a dragonfly she's conjured from the empty air, jeweled in its beauty, delicate, its tremulous wings, tremulous body waiting for her to breathe the concept of flight that makes it so. To do this, her left hand is laid open as her right caresses the air in a motion that shapes the life form being awakened there. Flower by lizard by bird, a sweet kind of magic from within the domain of the imagination. Petals unfurl their velvet tongues at her lightest touch. A cat's tail curls its subtle questions into the languid air. Birds sing their way closer to me, whether anyone can hear them or not, while the panting lizards cool themselves in the shadows. I move the cursor, press play again. If only to hear Elise talk about pleasure, to hear her say, it's true, I get so much joy in doing this, and to linger with her there, in that brief suspension, her head tilting as if sunlight were pouring into her, while she holds an invisible prayer in her fingertips that she will soon place within the bowl of her hand. She was sitting right there when she said it. The light was coming in through the window from right over there. Mm. And as I read the poem, it was a very uncanny experience because I read it in front of a couple of groups of people in California and other places over this fall. But this is very kind of surreal to sitting right where I was sitting while I was filming her saying that, you know.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you read that one. It was one that I kind of kept going back to, so I'm sure we'll talk about it some more too.
Yeah, and I'll thank you. I'll read a poem from the Dead Peasant's Handbook. These books, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, I'm sure, they sort of spiral outwards. So the first two that I just happened to read tonight are very directly connected. Well, this one is too, though. Well, we'll see. Let's just read the poem. Let the poem do its work. It's called The Bodies. The bodies lie along the shoulder of the road. The bodies lie in an ambulance, a truck bed, a stretcher. The bodies are strobed in flaring lights, color of fire, color of night. The bodies rest within the fuselage of a plane at 36,000 feet. The bodies contemplate silence as they wait in the morgue. The bodies are moved from room to room, 1 hour to the next. The bodies are bathed by strangers and by those who love them. They are numbered and recorded with signatures and stamps. They are forgotten by all save those who love them. They are left to the fields, to the green embrace of earth. They are given sunlight and storm, a shadow of wings descending. They are given to rivers, to fire, to ash on the wind-driven rain. They are carried on the shoulders of stone-faced men. They are serenaded with tears, with the instruments of suffering. They are eulogized in great halls and within the confines of loneliness. They are lowered into the ground and into the vaults of memory. They are disassembled and dispersed by the steady labor of time. They learn more about compassion as they are lifted in someone's arms. They learn more about the sacred as voices call out around them. They learn more about grieving as their eyes are sewn shut. The bodies are moved from room to room, 1 hour to the next. The bodies are numbered and recorded with signatures and stamps. The bodies are bathed by strangers and by those who love them. The bodies contemplate silence as they await the mortician, and they are forgotten by all save those who love them. Yeah, that's a hard one to read, I realize, because my mother passed away 2 weeks ago.
Oh, wow. Sorry.
So well, you know, it's I've had a lot of losses over the last 10 years and just these low swales, the wave just pulls down into the trough, of grief, wake, whatever word you might use for it. And I just decided with her, I didn't know this until I was in New Mexico, and we were in northern New Mexico in a small town called Tucumcari. And I'm sorry for the practical stuff for this, but about 2 hours away is where her body had to go to be cremated. And another hour and a half away, sort of like a large triangle, was another town where the actual funeral home was. So her ashes were then brought to there. And then I had to drive to the funeral home about an hour and a half away from my sister's house. And I had rented a car at the airport, a little economy car, you know, but they had bumped me up for free. I guess they did some scheduling problem or something. So they gave me a Ford Mustang with a convertible top. And I actually don't really care about cars. I just like going from A to B. The car doesn't matter. But my mom liked cars, and she
Mm.
would have really liked that car, you know. And so something about it was morning, the sun was coming pouring over us, the top was down, the wind was blowing through. It was a sunny, warm day, and we're driving into the sun, and her ashes are there with the seatbelt, you know, the whole thing. And I had the Beatles on. She loved the Beatles, so I just cranked up the Beatles, and it was like this Beatles XM radio marathon into the sun, you know. And it just, I came to this point where I just realized I really want to celebrate her, not go into the usual low swale.
Mm.
And she had a beautiful life. She lived, not at the end. The last few years were difficult and confusing and troubling for her, I know. But the bulk of her life was a beautiful, amazing life. She's incredibly kind. And I'll share one thing with you, and I'm sorry to, I hope we're not derailing too far.
Oh,
Hope I'm
no.
not going too far. But I'll share with you one thing. So in memory of my mother, Linda Turner, if you want to do something fun and amazing, you could follow her lead, which is when I was about 9, I believe. It was March 24th, and she told me I wasn't going to go to school that day. She said, I'll sign a note for you tomorrow. You're not going to school today. I'm not going to go to work today. I'm going to call in sick. And today and from now on, March 24th is fun day.
Mm.
And she made a holiday for us. It was our holiday. It is our holiday, and has been my whole life, and it will continue to be. And on March 24th, you don't do your usual thing. You go with those you love, and you do things with them that they like to do, you know, and it's fun day.
Mm.
So I encourage you to do likewise if, March 24th. So
I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for not only sharing the poems, but even in the story you just told. I think some folks are talking about it in the chat too. The way you evoke presence, and the way you describe everything, I think is something that we'll continue to talk about with your work, and I can see, you know, the poetry kind of seeping through your being as well, which is lovely. So I feel very privileged to be here tonight in this space with everyone.
mm,
All
thank you.
right. So why don't we start with maybe if you could tell us a little bit about who you are as a person, as a poet, maybe how you came to poetry.
Yeah, me as a person, I'll give you. I mean, it's and you know, that's too big a question for us if you know. And but I'm if you were here late at night, you know, sometimes you get hungry and you want to go to the fridge and you just like raid the fridge for something. It used to always be like chocolate or sweet stuff, like ice cream for me. But lately it's been kimchi. I don't know what the deal is with
Mm.
that, but I love kimchi. I lived in Korea for a year, and that's why I kind of got hooked on it. But so you might see me in there. My dog kind of look at me like, "What are you doing? What's coming this way? What am I getting here?" You know. My dog is a really big part of my life now. um, she kind of helped me she sort of retaught me how to laugh, I
Mm.
guess, because I hadn't laughed in a long time. And it's kind of hard to have a puppy and not laugh, you know. It's just, it's part of the nature of it, you know. And I come from the San Joaquin Valley in California originally. I was born there, which I think is a wellspring of writing and poetry for America. We often look to the big cities, New York and Chicago and all that. And nothing against Chicago. I know I saw somebody from Chicago, but I really feel like the Central Valley is kind of underappreciated on a larger scale, but it doesn't really matter.
Mm.
The writers are coming out of there, and it's generational. It's a multi-generational sort of wellspring for American letters. A lot of amazing people. It's at the bottom of a dead sea, so that's where I was born and raised. And we could look up, and I could see from our family home, I could see the snow ridge crests of
Mm.
Yosemite. If I don't know if you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. But if you haven't, you've probably seen Ansel Adams photographs of those
Mm.
peaks there. And I could see those from where I was, but I didn't live there. That was, and it comes up in one of my poems at one point. I mentioned in here that it was like a gas tank away. It's too far. We couldn't
Yeah.
afford to get there, you know. But you could see a beautiful place, but it wasn't where we were. And that's what I'd often say. But then in reality, it is a beautiful place. You just have to shift the lens just slightly and see it for its own beauty. And it's a very beautiful place. It's just a different kind of beauty. That's all. I play bass guitar. I played trumpet in school, and maybe I should use it this way. I started writing, or I was writing poems, I'm sure, all the way along, but I got more into poetry as a late teenager. And my hair was halfway down my back. I started playing bass guitar. I was trying to like write lyrics for this band, and I thought poetry would help me to write the lyrics better. I kind of thought they were the same thing, and sometimes they can be, but it's very rare. The guitar player in the band, his name also is like my name, Brian. He wrote amazing lyrics. He was always a much better lyricist than I ever have been. But I took a few poetry classes in college, and it just sort of pulled me further and further into this art form that surprised me and gave me a lot of things that were unexpected and were helpful in my life. A kind of meditative practice that I didn't have in other with the lyrics and all that. So yeah, maybe that's a brief sketch. I've traveled and lived in a lot of places around the planet. Both in the military. I was in the Army for 7 years. I went to Bosnia as a NATO peacekeeper, I guess is the technical term. And then I was in Iraq as a U.S. Army infantry sergeant. And from 2003 to 2004, my first book of poetry was written there. And then the first book published. So I wrote 7 books before that weren't published, like we do, you know what I mean? So I hope that's not too long of a sketch, but that's some of Brian's life.
Yeah, no, I think I see all of those details coming into your work as well. So I think it's a perfect sketch, as brief as we have to be in some ways. Even those places that return. When you were discussing just now Yosemite, I immediately thought of the poem where Yosemite was sort of out of reach on the horizon. So it's great to kind of fill that out a little bit more. All right, so our first official question is sometimes thought of as our difficult question, which is, what's something that you have not been asked about your work that you've always wanted to talk about? Or maybe a different phrasing, is there something that you notice or something that you do on the page that has not been kind of brought to attention yet?
Yeah, thank you. I'm thinking about that. And you'll find that with most questions, I just dive in and stuff. But that one, I feel like I've gotten in. I continue to get what I personally, my connection with my own writing. I initially got that when I was first writing it, and then that initial meditation, and then I also get things from my writing over time, like the body. Like I guess one of the tests of that is that I don't continue to read poems in front of people if I don't feel them doing some kind of work inside of me. You know, you can feel like there's an intellectual part of our connection to our work, but the body also has a way of being. You can feel if you're charged inside somehow. And if I feel that charge lessening, then I just don't include that, and I don't keep reading it in front of people, you know. But in terms of if I flip that to the answer of like what others might, you know, it isn't, I don't, and I hope I'm not being like unhelpful with this. I really don't, I guess I don't really hope too much that they'll echo something that I have in it. What I really am thrilled by is when someone either connects with it for some reason and they share that with me, or they surprise me with some way of seeing something in a poem that I didn't see before. You know, that's wonderful, you know. Both of those are wonderful. So I know I'm not answering the question, I suppose, but it's, you know, it's like I guess I don't really think of it that way. Like if someone in it, I don't know, I guess maybe it's too negative I thought, but I sort of feel like if I'm hoping someone will see the thing that I did, then it's like I'm kind of waiting for them to kind of pat me on the back, you know, like, good boy, good job, you know. You know, like that won't really make me a better writer or help me on my way, you know. But the other stuff where people engage with the work or they see something different, And I'm also a kind of writer. I don't know how you are with your work, Emily, but I'm sort of like I don't I think that the author, I try to stand back from criticism and not sort of defend my work, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really curious about what people think about it, and if they see something that I know wasn't necessarily my intention with the work, I'm really intrigued to see how they can look into the text or maybe the context of the author, or the author, the time, you know, those other larger contexts, to see a way where they can say, point, there's, you know what I mean, if there's basically
Mm.
a descriptive way of saying, yeah, these are what, this is why. And that's when I get fascinated, because then I can see a new way into my own work and it becomes alive again in a different way.
Yeah, that sort of surprise of the work, I think, is a great joy of poetry. The fact that we all bring something to the work that we read, the same way that we all bring something to our own work in different ways as well. Um, yeah, no, I think that's a wonderful answer to
And
a difficult question.
had, there's been dissertations written on my work, you know, and that's just weird for one. I would just say that right up front. It's strange, but it's also such an honor, you know, to think that someone would take that much time in their life and energy to think that deeply into something. So, you know, I've learned sometimes things from those. I haven't read most of them, but a few of them have asked me to read passages and stuff. So, and a lot of that's been in the UK too. So it's not
Mm.
here, but also overseas. So,
Yeah, that's lovely. That sense of attention, so interesting. So I wanted to at first talk about the relationship between these three books, sort of situating them as a trilogy. And you mentioned them being sort of an extended meditation of sorts. So could you just talk through how you started this project and maybe when it started to take shape as three distinct books in some way?
sure. And I think a little portions of it, a few poems started prior to Elise's passing or crossing over. And so this would be like 2014, maybe around there. There was a couple of poems, maybe even 2012, think back. And then there are a couple of poems in the last one that are from a little bit before then, but I didn't know they would be a part of this at that time. They were just sort of
Mm.
poems that were just in notebooks that were sort of that I would read sometimes at a reading or something, and they hadn't found a home in a book, you know. And after I mentioned Brian, who was the lyricist, the guitar player. He's my best friend since I was 7. He
Mm.
passed away in 2012 from cancer. And I didn't think I'd make music ever again, actually, because we'd always made music together my whole life, you know, and I just couldn't imagine it. And
Mm.
then about a year went by, and then I found a recording after I came back from Iraq and I got out of the army. I drove down to California. I had a Jeep, and I remember thinking it was a good Jeep, but it was kind of the engine was a little sketchy and it would overheat sometimes. And I was a little
Mm.
worried it might not make the drive from Tacoma, Washington down to Fresno in California. And I I know this is probably silly, but I was like fully serious about this. I remember thinking, okay, if it breaks down along the way, then I'm going to live wherever it breaks down. That's just going to be like a sign. I don't know if that's very practical, but that's what. But it made it down there, and I got back home to you know, my hometown in Fresno and all. And I went over to his apartment at one point, and we recorded with a couple of acoustic guitars some songs, about 8 or 10 songs, or so. I think it was about 8. And it was just he and I on 2 acoustic guitars. I had a nylon string, so it was very sort of lower tone,
Mm.
and he had a steel string, so it had a brighter tone to it. But we only had one sort of crappy microphone in the middle, and it was recorded on one track, the two of us together, right? So I found these recordings, you know, after he was gone, and I looked at I listened to them, and I just remember thinking a few. I don't know if I'm changing my memory now, but I think I remember the way I remember it is that I thought, you know, people should hear. I want to share these with people. Like
Mm.
I get it. This is a great song. Like I wish people could hear the song. And so there are a couple of those that I took them to a friend here in town who's an engineer and music engineer. and he has a studio in his house. And we went through, and what we did is he cut the lower bass frequencies out, which effectively took me out of the mix, and isolated his higher frequency steel string guitar. And then we were able to line it up a little bit so that, because we were playing freeform without a drum or anything. And then after cleaning up the track a little bit, I played bass guitar. We brought in a drummer and a guitarist and all stuff. And so what ended up happening is we were able to, like, in some ways, collaborate with him. And that process, and it's a long-winded way of getting to your question, and said I started to learn how to create art with the dead that I love, you know, and because oftentimes we'll memorialize those we love, and I do that too, you know, to create these Taj Mahals, these, you know, these beautiful things to remember them, these spaces where we can go as a sacred space to kind of connect or something, you know, tombstones over connected to their lives or something. I do that as well. I have that impulse. But he was an artist, and then, you know, 2 years later, my father passed, and then in 2016, Elise, and my grandfather also in there too. But it was his time. It felt natural with him, and I just started. But Elise and Brian were both artists, and I really felt like I want their work to be in the world. When she was alive, I have to admit, I was kind of guarded about my family and my loved ones. And I'd had a public life, but also tried to keep my private life more, you know, to myself. And I was a little selfish with her, I can see now. But now I'm trying not to be. And so like sharing her poems and then being in conversation with her in these works, it's a way I hope for people to fall in love with her. And if they do, even in small ways, like the bowl of her hand, you know, those little moments where they might fall in love and have that moment carried, then she gets carried forward this room, you know, with me. And I just think it's beautiful, and it should be, because she was just coming into her own as an artist. So that's sort of context of the broad scope, I suppose, is there's 3 books, and they just started to arrive. There's a real complicated part of that, but the simple, I guess, overview is that it starts with a kind of an intimate conversation between me and Elise. It's a you address in the first book. So it's kind of a love letter to her in a way. And then they spiral, the book by book, it spirals further and further out. We get more towards my friend Brian and my father and other loved ones lost along the way. And then it gets beyond us out into the world kind of thing. So it's, that's kind of a broad overview. But here's the crazy part. Okay, so everybody's a writer here, right? We're all readers and writers, and so to get to the first book, The Wild Delight of Wild Things, and Emily, just like throw something at me if I'm talking too long, okay?
Oh, no, you're good.
So this book, I didn't know I was writing this book. I was writing a novel, actually. It's over there. It's in a cup. There's a rollout thing where you know, drawers and stuff. It's all, the drafts are in there. But I wrote this novel about the wall with Mexico, and I was really, you know, I was angry, as I still am. I was angry about this idea of a wall with Mexico, and I love the writer Ismail Kadare, the Albanian novelist. I'll write his name in the chat. It's probably Kadare, so I should know how to pronounce it properly. But the Albanian novelist, I mean, Elise found his work first, and then she's like, you got to read this book. And then we read all the books in translation that we could find. And then I went to Albania because I wanted to see the landscape where these stories were coming from. I mean, that's kind of the fanboy, you know what I mean? I was like, all the way with it. But so I tried to think, like, how would he approach something like this? And I thought, okay, I'll write it sort of in the generationally near future, where the wall, America just kept building the wall, and it just got higher, higher, and higher, you know. And so I wrote that book, and there's one section in there which is connected to Japan. Actually, I know we have a couple of people from Japan, and in that section, the workers were being overworked, so a few people committed suicide, you know, in this fictional story, and so mourners were coming to mourn, but it's still a work site with like bulldozers and, you know, hoisting things up high and stuff. So it's not safe. And so they tried to create like a memorial garden. This is, you know, I had in mind, maybe some of you heard the story on NPR where there was in Fukushima, after the the tsunami came in, a lot
Mm.
of some of the houses were washed out, pulled out to sea, and it was just land there now. So when people came to mourn, they couldn't. Their memory was erased in the landscape, And so somebody put a British telephone booth out there, and so people would go in there and sit in the booth
Mm.
and talk to their loved ones. So I took that telephone booth and I put it in my story right there. And so I had characters in my story talking this. So anyways, the shorter version of this is I wrote this novel about what I wanted to write about. I wanted to write about this thing I was angry about, this political thing that I thought this wrong thing, this thing is wrong. But what I needed to write about was in that telephone booth. And there's only about 3,000 words. So I ended up scrapping the novel and starting over. But because I'm a knucklehead, I wrote another novel. And when I write a novel, I'm in a full draft and sending out to friends, getting feedback, revising, doing the thing,
Mm.
the process all in, you know what I mean? Like all in on the thing. And I write this novel, and I don't think that one was a bad idea, but it's like a want versus need thing.
Mm.
And the second time I wrote it, I got closer, but it was like I won't go through the whole story, but it was a sort of sci-fi book that with a telecommunications relay station between the living and the dead, right?
Mm.
And so I'm getting closer to the idea. Again, though, there was one little passage that really was like nonfiction. It was like
Mm.
nature. It was like nature writing. In fact, I did research about whales dying in the open ocean. And because sometimes it takes about 50 years for a whale to die if they die in the open ocean, and Elise was kind of proud that she had made it to her 50th birthday.
Mm.
So for me, it had kind of a personal resonance, that fact. So I wrote that passage. It was a very short, maybe 2 or 3 pages or something. But then I realized that I was writing the wrong genre. Like I shouldn't
Mm.
be writing a novel. I should be writing lyric nonfiction. And then I set out to write short flash nonfiction, 750 words or less, 100 of them, because I thought I'll get better at writing it if I do 100 of them. Then also I thought there was ways I could do arcs and some internal structures with 100 that would be interesting and helping develop a lot of different ideas. But I had, for each piece though, I had a rule. They had to be about nature, but I had to do 2 things. They had to be under 100, 750 words, but 2 things was, one, I had to be in conversation with Elise, and the other thing is I had to learn something about the world, something about nature.
Mm.
There's research involved, like getting on science Twitter and talking to scientists and getting in conversation with them and asking them if they could, or looking through their university email address and
Mm.
talking to them and sending them the piece to see if they would help me, or finding a perfume person in this that keeps antique perfumes and historical perfumes and scents in France, and having my friend in LA who speaks French intervened, help me to, what I mean? Like, so I had to do that kind of research to write that book. And then I wrote that book. And I went through drafts, and I thought it was maybe the best book I'd ever written. And then there's part of the story I don't really want to share right now because it's just a real bummer. But it's not working as a book. I
Mm.
had to sit on that for a while. And then when I looked at it, I thought, I think it's, again, this is, I wrote 2 novels that were like what I wanted to write, but then there was the need, little pieces. And now I think I got the right book, but I'm too far into nonfiction, lyric nonfiction, that I needed to like dial in the lens.
Mm.
Sharper picture would be in poetry. So that's a long win. I'm so sorry for a long answer, but like I just want to get to this book, I had to write 3 other books
Mm.
to get to this one. And because I think there's a more economical way to do this. So I don't necessarily encourage any of you to follow my process. But that gets to, even at a micro level, like with a poem,
Yeah.
I don't try to know. I wonder if that's the same for you, Emily, or others, but like I don't know where I'm writing towards. It really is a kind of meditation.
Mm.
I'm like going in the dark and trying to find my way forward.
I love that. I love the progression that you're talking about, because I love that you brought up research, because I saw a question in the chat sort of about those components, the really strong natural and kind of science imagery, and that was a question I had as well. Those anchoring images, but I also love that sort of opening up of possibility, and that distinction that you're making between sort of the want and the need, right? I think we're sort of always sometimes writing something, and inside that thing is the actual thing, right? It's reaching outwards for where it needs to go, and we might not realize it at that moment. And it's lovely and kind of eye-opening to hear a poet talk so openly about that process too. Not, there's nothing wrong with the book maybe falling in your lap complete and it's perfect the way it is, but sort of having to work through and work through the project and get to the kernel of the thing, those intimate conversations. And I think you also mentioned the sort of presence of both Elise and Brian and some of these other figures. And that's something that I think was so impactful to just kind of deepen as I was moving through each collection. It felt like, okay, I'm here, I feel their presence as well. I'm kind of building out as much of this interaction, this intimacy as possible through these poems. So I really appreciated that movement too. Could you talk a little bit more about those research components? And I'm wondering too, if there's anything that was particularly kind of surprising to you. I love the focus on the natural imagery. I mean, you mentioned the whale fall, and of course the ocean comes in a lot of different ways, and there's a lot of unknowns with the ocean, but there's a lot of really interesting facts. And you also brought in, I mean, things about music and sound and other elements of the natural world, landscape. So yeah, I'm curious, maybe like how you approach that, how you find that balance between those research elements and the lyric elements of the poems, and maybe if anything surprised you along the way.
Yeah, this probably be a far too incomplete an answer for a good question, but I think I was when I had to sort of dial in that lens as I was talking about to get this book and to shift it into verse more than into nonfiction. Part of that was a lot. I had to sort of just wholesale pull out a lot of sort of fact-based stuff out because it really bogged down the music with that, and it was clunky and it didn't really serve the shorter. I say shorter, but the lines are really long in this particular book, and they're really, I think they're pushing the line of whether it's a poem or it's an essay kind of thing, a lot of ways, and they're much more of the storyteller and not as much the songbird, in the first book, and I think part of that's also because I think of it as a conversation too, her, and the music when I was writing the first of these three books. Each book has this is where caffeine gets beyond. I must have like an intravenous thing or something. But each book has at the back, there's a black page like this, and there's a QR code. So each book has its own album of music that goes with it, and then there's another album and another album. So it's really 3 books and 3 albums. And then just to make it kind of overwhelming, there's a weird thing called the spirit box on the back cover. And you can use your smartphone with the camera and you can open up, there's a 3-part film, where like in this one, I'm on the beach and I walk up and start talking to the camera about love and loss. And it's really like, I think of it as like a video essay or a video monologue or something. But this first one, I should say these two, the albums and the music that come with them are more traditional albums in the sense where they could be on radio maybe or something. In fact, they are on radio, and they're both, those 2 albums are on Spotify and all the streaming things and all that. I hired a music publicist and a radio promotion company to put it out on college radio and stuff.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so that song that I was talking about, one of the songs that we recorded in that apartment with my friend Brian, that's the song we picked to put out, so people can hear his music, and but the music with this one is different, and it's a 27-minute long sound meditation is how I think of it. And there's a video that goes with it that I filmed in clouds over several years, where you just see, you can watch the clouds if you want, or just put headphones on and listen to the music. But what I'm hoping is that people might read this book, and if they did, it'd be an honor for me. But I'm thinking it's a difficult experience. Just trying to think from a reader's point of view. I think this is a difficult book, and it doesn't really. There's a little bit of sweetness at the end, but not really enough to make you walk out just feeling better. You know, and but it's, that's how I feel too. And at the time I was writing this, I was making music, but I was sort of finding my way in the darkness with the sound, the same way I was with the poems. And I mean that literally. Like, I was in Chennai, India, and I was supposed to talk about poems about war and stuff, but I was at this arts school, and there were 80 to 120 or so dancing students and singing students in this room. And I have a really good recorder that I usually take with me when I travel. So somehow I talked them into helping me do this chanting thing, and I made up a chant on the spot, and then they sang, and I recorded them. And I was really interested, and you brought this up earlier with waves in the ocean, because waves is a recurring theme. And so maybe this gets more to craft.
Yeah.
So from the very beginning, the very first note of the music is the sound of waves from where Elise and I used to go to the ocean, and a recording of that. And then the very first, after Elise's opening piece, that poem that I read, Geologic, about the wild delight of wild things, the opening piece is a lyric essay, I would say. It's not really a poem, it's more a lyric essay that's about the nature of waves and other things. But it starts with the idea of what a wave is. And then the video on the back cover of that book, when you see the ocean rolling in, and then I walk up from the waves to talk about love and loss. Then if you go to the end of the 3 books, each of those 3 elements, the verses, the music, and the video, they all finish on waves. So it's that motif is carried throughout and bookends it. And it's about this idea of sort of waves. So getting back to the first music piece, I found that the book it wasn't cathartic. I didn't feel better after writing it. Maybe I will over time, I don't know. But the music really helps me in a different way as I started putting it together. And there are no lyrics on that first song. It's all just human voices and other instruments playing. And it's I feel that does make me feel better. And so my hope is if someone reads it, they'll read and then listen to the music to kind of think about and process the book.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I don't.
Yeah, no, I think that's amazing. I think all these components that are coming, I mean, you're talking about the literal music that accompanies the book, but there's so much music within the lines and within the images. And I kept going back to the waves, the way the waves were coming through in different moments. And it's taking me to, I mean, earlier in the conversation, right, this sort of waves or the ebbing and flowing of grief and experience and loss, and that sort of presence that is underneath the undercurrent of all these poems in some way too. I saw a question in the chat that was also a question that I had too. So everyone in the chat is really making my job easier. It was a question about balancing narrative impulse and lyric impulse. And that was something I noticed as well, that so many of these poems are really telling a story, but there's also so much of that lyric component. So could you talk about that sort of balancing act and how you worked to kind of achieve that combination of style?
Yeah, I think I guess I was alluding to that earlier with this songbird and storytellers, but when I was at the University of Oregon, I remember I studied there in the mid-90s. That's why I got an MFA. I studied with T.R. Hummer and Dorian Laux and Garrett Hongo, and and also all of my classmates, who are still good friends. And I think one among them was a poet named Naveed Alam, and he lives in Pakistan. And he's when he was there in Oregon studying with me, I remember going over to his apartment once, and he was talking about his process, and he said that he would walk with his poems, and I was really curious about that, what he meant by that. And so he would literally go outside. He maybe has a line or two. He doesn't have the poem yet, but he has a fragment, of language that's
Mm.
intriguing to him, and he's compelled, and he doesn't know where the poem's going to go. So he would go outside and walk down the street, go to the park and walk around the park, sort of mumbling the lines out loud to himself. And I do that here in this house. My I realized after a while, I was like, why is it the best room in the house is it's not a very large house, but the largest room is in the living room. I can make about 3 steps. I hit a wall and I got to turn around, So it's not very big, but it has the largest window. So I like to be able to see
Mm.
outside when I'm writing. And I have there's a bedroom over there that was the office for years, and I guess technically still is, but it made no sense, just to have this big room that I wasn't using and tuck my way itself away in this little cubby over there. So anyways, so when neighbors walk by, they must see me doing my own version of Navid by
Mm.
just sort of walking back and forth and mumbling to myself. And for them, it's like a big fish tank looking window. This guy inside, just sort of like, there he goes again. That's what he does. But what I'm trying to do is sort of set the music in my body,
Mm.
because I know, because I've been written for a while now, I know that my mind and like the neocortex will take over at some point, and the neocortex and the mind wants, like, rhetorical structures and parallel structures, and that beautiful symmetry of parallel structure.
Mm.
And it wants illusion and layers and this and this and this and this. It wants, like, story over time, or disruption of story, or all those kinds of complicated things about the world we live in, and these moments in our lives, and how they might be connected, and all that kind of stuff, and what's going on with the human heart, with all that, blah blah, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the body doesn't care about any of that.
Mm.
The body just wants music, you know right? It just wants to dance, and it wants to be a vehicle of sound. It's an
Mm.
instrument. And so I'm trying to learn from Navid still, that if I can set those, when I'm starting to write a poem, if I can set the music, even if it's only a few lines, and I know those lines have some fuel to them, some juice or something, then I repeat them like that to set it, so that when the mind takes over, I'm hoping that the body it'll know when I stumble in the musical part, so they stay on
Mm.
as they're as the construction goes on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that really resonates with me because I felt that sort of rhythm, that embodiedness of the music in the poems as I was moving through. And I think it's really interesting to hear you talk about sort of privileging that at the start of the poem, and then sort of finding your way through the other elements as well. That importance of music, I think, really shines in many different ways in the work too.
And I do that with nonfiction too.
Mm.
I don't sort of just do it for poetry, because I think the sentences have to be just as beautiful across the genres.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I even noticed that. I mean, you mentioned some of the kind of more lyric essay-ish pieces, or the prosier pieces. And they're just as um musically tuned, right, as the poems around it. There's kind of that you get lulled into those movements in a beautiful way. I think leaning into that lyric element, really interesting. Let me just do a quick check here. I wanted to see, okay, we have a couple more minutes here. You mentioned a lot of different poets throughout the collection. Of course, Elise's work plays a huge part in the work as well. So could you just talk about, the poets that you see yourself in conversation with in different ways? Who are your influences, or who do you sort of return to?
Yeah, I think I can say a few, but I love this question. So, like, just a quick would be like Martina Spada, maybe Linda Hull for sure. She's even quoted in one of the poems. Philip Levine, Connie Hales. If you know
Mm.
Corinne Clegg Hales, she's out in Fresno. She's probably one of my really biggest influences. Um, I mean, the list goes on. Levertov and Jack Gilbert and a lot of contemporary writers are doing are I know or start, but I think they're going to influence stuff that I'm about to write more. Uh,
Mm,
but I think those are contemporary writers, but I mean the next wave of writers coming up, because we live in this amazing time where there's a there's just a huge wave of writers.
mhm,
They're they're all doing this a wide range of things, and it's amazing. And we're really lucky to be in this time with what you can find on the shelves. I remember
mm.
1985, you go to like a bookstore, most bookstores, and you look, and there were amazing writers, but it was the same ones that I was going to find 6 months later and next year and the year after. And it was that one little 4 shelves, maybe, and that was it. And it was the same
Mm,
amazing writers. And but it's not like that anymore. And it's really pretty amazing. Um, but to really answer the question, it and I wish more writers would do this, because as much as this house, there's a bunch of books right there.
mm,
Some of my to-do read list stuff, these are ones I want to either reread or read first time. There's a bunch in there. This is just a little bit. Then there's that little room I told you about. That's the main library room. There's some books,
mm,
like your houses too. There's just books all over, and there's so much I could just point. There's a poetry section right here of I even alphabetized it and stuff. And there's amazing poets here that I love. But as much as they've influenced me, my biggest influence would be Elise and Brian.
mm,
My friend Brian, I met him when I was 7 years old. And our arguments and discussions about he wanted to be a filmmaker. That was his main thing. I wanted to be a writer. And we both wanted to be musicians too. So
mm,
so from 7 years on, our discussions about how to make a scene or how film is constructed, the way a story goes, what is the architecture, photography, writing, music composition, like all those the politics threaded through all of it, and what is genius in art, and do you need to have drugs as a gateway to get into the creative
mm,
process? And I could just go on and on and on, and it's like that is so much more foundational, that conversation. And then to have the great gift of meeting Elise and then having like that conversation for
mm,
years, and to be with another writer, a poet who could teach me so much, and still teaches me. Those conversations are so much more foundational than any of these books, as much as I love them. And I just wish more writers would like bring out the people that actually influence them, and like
mm,
give them their due. you know um like Philip Levine, one of his big influences, Peter Everwine, who some people know his work, but he's more known regionally.
mm,
At least at the time, I think it seems like he's getting more well known around the country now. But I know they had an intense conversation, and Levis, of course, Larry Levis and Phil Levine are known for having this amazing conversation in art.
mm,
But Peter Everwine did too. And it's like, but people don't seem to know it as much, kind of thing.
mhm.
That's probably a poor example. I can just use me as an example. I'm a better example of it. you know I can point to the gods, but also to the gods in my life,
Mm,
these amazing people.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's really poignant, right? Because there's the sort of the things that we take in, but there's also that community that builds us, that lived experience, the life of a poet, doing the living outside of the page in some way, and how we then bring that to the page and its sort of lasting influence. Yeah, I always appreciate when poets point to um, the people that surround them, right? The people that help us to do what we need to do on the page, because we're never writing in a vacuum. We're always sort of engaging with each other in different ways.
I would add Stacy Lynn Brown, who's a poet
Mm,
somebody you might know as well, right? Or hopefully all you do. But we went to grad school together, and I probably wouldn't be talking to any of you if it wasn't for her. And like
mm,
there was when Here Bullet was a manuscript, I was at zero on my bank account. I didn't have $25 to send for the contest.
Mm.
She was sending her manuscript too, and she doubled her check and said, "Hey, help out this deadbeat over here." And that's how that book was able to be entered into the contest.
Mm.
So and much more than that, she taught me. Here's something I'd like to share with all of you. Do we have enough time? A minute or two?
Yeah, we definitely have a minute or two left.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't have a pen with me, but you can imagine this. She drew a V on a piece of paper. She said, "Brian, you write these poems that are very clear, and they have, very narrative, and there's a story. You can really see what's going on. It's interesting, and it comes down to a point. And right there, it feels very boom. We get here. You always have this killer line that just feels like it just, gut punches you. Like, oh, you really feel it emotionally, but it feels very final." And she said, if there was a way to just imagine the V, and then she did another little V, if you could just open it up somehow at the end, a little somehow. And I sat with that for a long time trying to figure out, kind of understand that. Like, what does that mean, And it could be at the end of the poem, but it could also be in different points of the poem where we might want to linger, because there are points in a piece. So it doesn't always have to just be at the end, but the end is easy to see. Like, how do you end something? Like we're trying to do now with this conversation, right? But and then one of my teachers, T.R. Hummer, he sent back a revision of a poem of mine for Here Bullet. And the stanza originally read like this. It was a war poem, very kind of quiet, but there's someone with a rifle looking at another person who's vulnerable. And the last stanza originally was, "My mind has become very clear. I have seen him in the shadows. I've watched him in the red circle of light my rifle brings to me. His song hums in the wings of sandflies." Right? So it ends on this image of a figure in the distance who's under threat with this rifle. To me, it feels very foreclosed, like it seems, because the image has these sandflies hovering, almost like vultures or flies with the dead, So it subtly feels foreclosed a little. And he didn't change a word, T.R. Hummer. He just moved a line. So now this is how it reads in the book. "I have seen him in the shadows. I've watched him in the red circle of light my rifle brings to me. His song hums in the wings of sandflies. My mind has become very clear." And it's strange because he put the assertion at the end. My mind has become very clear. I don't know how it is for you, but I'm the writer. And I immediately, when I read the poem, think, just a little question comes up. Well, what did you do? And it just opens a little. And every poem has different ways of doing this, but like, how can we find ways to feel that the work we've done satisfies our need for the meditation, so that it feels complete and whole, and yet has a way of opening into the well below, so that we might learn more from the poem when we come back to it. How can we be pulled back into the poem to learn more? And that's a lesson. It'll be a lifelong one for me, but that's one I hope is useful to somebody here, or maybe all of you.
Yeah, no, wow, that is, I hate ending these conversations, but I think if we were to end a conversation talking about endings and then openings into the world, I think this is the perfect place to do it. Thank you so much, Brian, for your generosity with your work, yourself, your craft advice. I learned so much in this conversation. So thank you for your time tonight. And thank you everyone in the audience for being here and for your wonderful questions and the engagement in the chat as well. It's been a lovely evening.
Thank you all. I put my Instagram handle over there if you want to add me there, and you can message me and we can stay in touch and all. And Emily and everyone, so thank you for letting me be a part of this much longer and really interesting conversation you're curating over time. So I'm going to be sharing the link for the archives myself with people I meet too.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yes, this will be recorded and or it is recording now and it'll be posted soon so that we can all come back to it. And thank you everyone for being here. Please, please, please also remember, buy these books. I hope that you find them as enlightening and engaging as I have. And I can't wait to further engage with all the other elements